Hello, everybody. I'm Leon Castro, the CEO of the Latino Community Foundation. Thank you for joining us today for this very special conversation in Town Hall about building lasting change in the Latino community and where we go from here after last week's election. Um, Let me just start off by saying that I know for many of us, the events of last week, the election of last week, was disappointing. And also, for a lot of people, is causing a tremendous amount of anxiety and concern about the future of our country and the future, especially for vulnerable communities, including many of the communities that the Latino Community Foundation and the panelists that you're going to hear from today serve. The Latino Community Foundation, for those of you who are not as familiar with it, is the nation's largest Latino-Latina serving foundation. It started as an offshoot of the United Way of San Francisco in 1989 and later became a statewide California independent philanthropic organization in 2016. The mission of LCF is to unleash the civic and economic power of Latinos. And in these last few years, we've invested in hundreds of Latino-led and Latino-serving organizations all over the state of California that are working on civic engagement, economic justice, economic opportunity. What we do is that we build community, we build power, and we make change. That challenge of making change in this environment is what I want to talk about today. We find ourselves at a moment of tremendous urgency for the Latino community, a time when the community in a very real way has a target on its back. On January 20th, Donald Trump will take office as the 47th president. We don't have to wonder, though, about many of the policies that the incoming administration will pursue, both because we've seen a lot of it and people remember the years 2017 to early 2021 on immigration, on any number of other issues that impacted vulnerable communities and particularly the Latino community. And also the rhetoric of the past campaign about mass deportations, about limiting the opportunities of the community. So in a very real way, this is an emergency situation, a crisis. And we want to have a conversation about the actions that we can take now to protect vulnerable communities and to ensure that the Latino community, like all communities, has the opportunity to sustain itself, to live comfortably, and ultimately to thrive and to continue to help power the success of California and of the United States and contribute in the way that it has been for many, many generations. Here to help me do that are some fantastic public and nonprofit and philanthropic leaders in California and nationally. I want to introduce them very briefly and then ask them to give their own perspective on what we just saw, where we're at, and then where we're going. And after they give some remarks, we'll have a conversation about that. The first person I want to introduce is California State Senator Lena Gonzalez, who represents California's 33rd State Senate District, which includes parts of Southeast Los Angeles and also her native Long Beach. State Senator Gonzalez is also the chair of the California Latino Legislative Caucus. And in that role, along with her colleagues, will have a tremendous impact on the response of the state to what's coming with the new Trump administration. Our second panelist is Angelica Salas. Angelica leads CHIRLA. Angelica is the executive director there at CHIRLA and has developed over time both a fantastic and impactful organization and also a wonderful reputation for being effective, for being visionary, and also going above and beyond to serve a very vulnerable community of both recent immigrants and people who live in mixed status households and others who need resources Chirla is one of the most effective direct service providers to our immigrant communities. Third, we have Fred Blackwell, who, in addition to serving on the board of the Latino Community Foundation, and Angelica also is an incoming board member, has led the San Francisco Foundation since 2014, is regarded himself as a visionary in philanthropy, making innovative moves in San Francisco and beyond. And oftentimes, as somebody new to philanthropy, in this last year, when I've had conversations, people have cited the work of Fred and the San Francisco Foundation and how to effectively address the need to create a multiracial democracy. And so we look forward to hearing his wisdom and perspective as well. And then last, but certainly not least, is Dr. Carmen Rojas, a friend and the leader of the Marguerite Casey Foundation since 2020. Innovative, groundbreaking in her own right. Before the Marguerite Casey Foundation, she led Workers Lab and has established a strong voice and a leadership position in philanthropy for addressing some of the most inveterate challenges for vulnerable communities and doing it with a progressive and constructive voice. So thank you, all of you, for joining us. I mentioned to our panelists that we're going to have the opportunity to both focus on what just happened and then also to really look forward. And I wanted to start off by just asking each of you, perhaps beginning with State Senator Gonzalez, to take 3 or 4 minutes to, help us understand what happened and also what you see as the urgency of now.
Absolutely. And thank you so much to Secretary Castro, as well as our community leaders who I've worked with before, directors and community leaders Salas, Blackwell, and Rojas, and to the Community Foundation for their relentless work for our Latino communities. As the Latino Caucus Chair in California, we're the one of the largest in the state as an ethnic caucus, but one of the largest in the country as well. We're 37 members strong and growing that after this election. And as the Latino Caucus Chair, along with my 2 co-chairs, Assemblymember Liz Ortega from Northern California and Assemblymember Juan Carrillo from Southern California, as mentioned, we are doing everything we can. Last week we met, and then continuing conversations with incredible stakeholders that we've talked to in other occasions, but now the time is more dire. For over 50 years, the caucus has been a really powerful voice and tireless advocate for our communities in California and beyond, especially in times of change like this, and especially in times of challenge. Our focus is going to remain on supporting our communities and finding proactive solutions. We're looking at solutions in the education space. We just spoken with our UC, CSU, and community college leaders about what that looks like on the ground for our DACA students and how to support them with legal resources and mental health. We've also talked to housing leaders about eviction defense and above and beyond just the deportation defense, but how do we support folks that are in their homes right now as renters, especially as we know Latino homelessness is going up, as well as our labor leaders. What happened on the ground? We will find out. We know that the narrative's been pushed out there by the media about what Latinos did and didn't do, but we need to create our own narratives. And I'm hoping that every single one of you listening today and alongside our leaders at the Latino Community Foundation, as well as CHIRLA, the Marguerite Casey Foundation, and San Francisco Foundation, can come together to create new narratives for us that talk about the issues that matter most, like the economy and inflation, and of course, the issue of deportation, mass deportation that we want to prevent here in California. Thank you for having me.
Thank you, Chairwoman Gonzalez. Angelica.
Thank you so much. First, also beginning by thanking Secretary Castro for bringing us together. And this is an incredible opportunity for me to say thank you to the Latino Community Foundation for being an incredible leader in making sure that the Latino serving organizations throughout the state of California grow in their capacity to be safe places for our communities to go, to be places where their leadership can be exercised and where their vision for California California can become real. So thank you so very much for having us all together. And so what I wanted to maybe begin by saying is that CHIRLA's mission is to create a just society fully inclusive of immigrants. We are an organization that is very proud to be responsive to the needs of our community. And we have a deep level of experience in both advancing proactive what I would say human rights legislation at the state level through our policy and advocacy at the local and at the state and at the federal level, but also in being able to rapidly respond to the needs of our community, whether it's because we are receiving buses from the state of Texas and we need to quickly engage our community to be responsive to the individuals who, for today, this is the first day of their being home in California, or it's because, or working with the people who have made California their home for over 30 years, but still remain undocumented. We work with immigrant youth at the high schools, and we work with our youth leaders in our colleges all across the state of California. It is important for me at this moment to just say that all of those people that I've described, including immigrant workers who could not vote, were out there knocking on doors and doing phone banking. And it is very important for me to note and say this, that they were part of really advancing our democracy in this country. And yet, they cannot vote. The impacts of this election are going to be so significant on their lives. But they contributed in a way that tried to ensure that community by community, we still had representation that was going to defend them. In this moment, for me, it's important to say that California has come a long way. In November, we also had 30 years as an anniversary of Proposition 187, and that's when I started at CHIRLA. And so I remember what California was like, where immigrants from especially Latino immigrants were directly attacked, where discrimination was not just targeted towards the undocumented, but to green card holders and U.S. citizens. And we have come a long way. And that what we have to do here in California is continue our forward progress and not be detoured. We have passed over 100 pieces of legislation at the state level that seek to protect our immigrant community in this moment that is going to be so difficult. And we have to make sure that those laws are exercised, they're known about, and they are reinforced. But we could do even more. We can do more to ensure that immigrant serving organizations across the state, and whether they're operating in the border, whether they're working in the Central Valley, or in many of the San Bernardino County or LA County, that they all are able to be strengthened, because these are the places of safety for our community. And what does that mean? It means that we need to make sure that they have the resources in order for them to do the community education and outreach, that they have the resources to make sure that they're able to provide the legal services and the rapid response work that's going to happen, especially if people are in detention and removal. And that we make sure that they also have the resources to put forward their vision for a better future. And so for me, I know we're going to get into much more conversation, but I think this is a moment that California can lead, and it could lead from the grassroots. It could lead from our city halls. It can lead from our county board of supervisors, and it could certainly lead at the state level, especially with the leadership of Senator Lina Gonzalez as head of the Latino legislative caucus, because I've seen that this is a moment where leadership matters at all levels, and that our community is going to be front and center in defying Trump and demonstrating that we can be a better nation, a united nation, a multiracial nation in which anybody, independent of where you were born, is included. Thank you.
Thank you, Angelica. Fred.
First of all, great to be here. Thank you for the invitation. Second of all, to what Angelica said. I think she dropped the mic on that, and love what you had to say there. I guess I wanted to open by saying a little bit of like what I think you might be able to expect from some of us in philanthropy, and I think where the verdict may still be out, and I think there's some question marks around how philanthropy is going to respond. Julian, your organization and mine are both a part of the California Executive Roundtable, where there are kind of equity-focused, California-focused foundations, private, family, community foundations that really kind of try to compare notes and collaborate on strategy in the state of California when it comes to issues of equity and inclusion. And as you know, we all signed on to a letter prior to knowing the election results, really kind of reinforcing our commitment to diversity, to justice, to inclusion, and to the points that were made earlier to support California to continue to be a guiding light around those issues. And I think for the organizations that are around that table and signed on to it, you can go to our website, you can go to the LCF website as well to see who the organizations are. There's some things that you can expect. I think one is you can expect many of us to stay the course. We have drawn a line in the sand around equity and inclusion and injustice. Those things have not been solved. So we will continue to work on them. We'll continue to provide support for those issues. And importantly, provide support to those issues in ways that provide what I would characterize as some sense of predictability and stability for the organizations that we've been supporting to do that work. I think in a moment like this, where there's so much uncertainty, it's important for institutions like ours to provide a level of certainty and stability for folks to rely on for the work that they've been doing prior to the election so that that work can continue, because the work, like I said, is not done. I think at the same time, though, that we want to stay the course, we also want to be in a posture where we can be responsive and nimble to what we are seeing. So to provide, additional support, different kinds of resources in a very kind of rapid response kind of way. So that when people are seeing things and responding to things on the ground, there's the ability to go somewhere to get resources that you maybe didn't budget for in the beginning of the year to be responsive to those issues. And so our ability to be able to be responsive and to do that with a quick turnaround is something that I also think you can expect from a lot of us on the philanthropic side here in California. In order for us to do that, we will have to be in close proximity and have our ears to the ground with folks who are on the ground. And so I think that's another important part of this, that in addition to kind of being in a posture of being nimble and responsive, we've got to be close enough to be able to be nimble. So this is not a time for us to retreat to our ivory towers, engage in strategic planning, et cetera, and so on. We need to be kind of shoulder to shoulder with folks who are on the ground. And then the last thing I would say about what you can expect, and then I want to talk to you a little bit, I think, around what the unknown is that you can expect us not only to be a part of all that, but really think about how we can partner with the governor, partner with the attorney general, partner with the legislature, to be a part of the resistance, to not only think about kind of what the responsive and reactive stuff is, but how do we be on the offensive? We know a lot of the stuff that's coming. We know the issue areas that we're going to be under attack with. We should not have to wait and to see what that comes. We need to make sure that we're fortifying ourselves with the kind of good thinking, strategic thinking, legal minds, legal practices that'll allow us to be a part of the resistance as well. Here's where I think the question mark is. For the broader part of philanthropy, I talked about the executive roundtable and who we are. That's a very small part of the philanthropic landscape. For the broader group of folks, for the foundations who have been supporting kind of immigrant rights and justice issues recently, and really leaning into that, for the foundations that have been kind of supporting environmental justice issues and climate change at the intersection of environmental justice, for the foundations that have been supporting worker rights, diversity, equity, and inclusion, health equity. The question is, were they doing that because it was trendy, or were they doing it because they really believed in it? And I think the verdict is out on that, because if they're doing it because it's trendy, it only takes a little bit of resistance for you to run from something that you were only doing because it was trendy. If you do it because you're believing in it, you will see those foundations lean into it even more. We remember when we had 2016, the Trump bump in support from philanthropy to be the resistance. I think the verdict is out as to whether the broader philanthropic community is going to move where a lot of the electorate moved to the right, or whether it's going to continue to be the force to try to kind of tap into our highest aspirations for what this country can be and lean into the things in ways that they leaned into it before.
Thanks so much for that, Fred. And look forward to the conversation on a lot of those points. Carmen?
So first and foremost, thank you so much for having me and for including me in this conversation. I am so grateful for your leadership in philanthropy in this moment, Secretary Castro, and for inviting me to be a part of this great panel of folks who I have long admired. We at Margaret Casey Foundation are really focused on supporting community organizing that shifts the balance of power in our government. We know that local, state, and at the federal level, our government should be motivated by making all of our lives stable, prosperous, and representative of all we are and aspire to be. And so coming out of last week, there are a couple of things that are front of mind for me, some hopes, some warnings, and some sort of, to Fred's point, like directives for philanthropy specifically. So first, this isn't a moment to blame any one community for the situation we find ourselves in. I don't think we can find ways to blame folks who are devastated by the loss of life in Gaza for this. 70% of those killed since last year are women and children. We can't blame people confused by the humanitarian crisis at the border for this loss. We can't blame 78% of working people who live paycheck to paycheck for this loss. And we most definitely have to stop blaming Latinos and Black folks for this loss. For me, it feels super important to name that this is a loss of a failure of our institutions to take seriously the suffering that people have been living with for decades and to regulate and punish those industries and people who profit from that suffering. Second, while I imagine myself to be an elections expert and pollster every 4 years, I just want to remind us that democracy is a daily endeavor. And in my mind and in our work, it starts with community organizing. It's the kind of organizing that meets people where they are, creates a home for them to understand the forces that are shaping their lives, and makes them leaders and protagonists in affecting change. This is long-term and hard work. And to be frank, it doesn't feel like the work that we have been invested in for the last number of years. So I'm just really hopeful, imploring people to double down on their investments in community organizing and in supporting that work. And then lastly, I think it's important to remember that, to Fred's point, the worst position for philanthropy to take at this moment is one of impartial observer, or to think that money alone can solve the problem of transformation. We need to bring way much more to the table than that. So not just money for communications. This is a moment for leaders of foundations, for donors, to step into the communications fray ourselves and really create a counterbalance to the attacks that are going to happen to leaders, to organizations, and to communities. We can't just offer money or throw money for bigger actions. We need to be in active communication with our grantees that will have their backs as they take more creative, more provocative, and more necessary actions in this time. Also, we can't just support organizations. Like, that is one part of our job. We all run institutions with resources that allow us to be in relationship with leaders across sector, and we have to leverage those relationships. And lastly, we can't just be in the practice of rhetorically supporting racial and economic justice as a goal. We have to be full-throated in our endorsement of racial and economic justice. We have to understand and continue to say, to Fred's point, that racial and economic justice is the precondition for the democracy that we want and not the other way around.
Thank you so much, Carmen. And now I want to just have a conversation and ask some questions because I know each of y'all just have amazing insight into this. And I'll start with Senator Gonzalez. The governor did call a special session to fully put on the radar, to take action on how California can protect itself against some of the worst pushback from the Trump administration and protect vulnerable communities. Could you give us a sense of the Latino caucus and what you're focused on, what you hope to get out of that? What, in your view, what would success look like at the end of this special session? And also, what can people out there do to be helpful in getting us to that point of success?
Yes, thank you, Secretary Castro. I mean, this forum in and of itself is such an incredible way for us to lift up the issue of special session. This is the immediate short term that we're thinking about as a legislature and especially as a Latino caucus. We are thinking about not just, as been mentioned by Dr. Rojas, the funding that could be provided to organizations, but we're going to have to do in-depth listening sessions. The Latino caucus and Latinos in general are not a monolith. What looks one way in Los Angeles may look very different in Central Valley as it looks different in the Bay Area and across the state. So we are in active discussions, as been mentioned, talking to our education partners, talking to housing partners, and continuing those discussions because we've been here before. We see a little bit of the roadmap, but we're actually actively opening the pages of Project 2025 because every one of those pages affects our communities. Whether it's dismantling the Department of Education, what is that going to do to Latino students? Whether it's looking at dismantling, obviously HUD, which I know is very important to all of us, especially you, Secretary Castro, and thinking about the evictions that may happen, especially with rising Latino homelessness. So we are engaging in those discussions. We may be allocating upwards of $200 million where it's going to be a lot of everything. It's not just deportation defense, but a lot of these other issues I've talked about. Obviously, reproductive justice and focusing with our other diversity caucuses, the Black, API, Jewish, LGBTQ, and also speaking with, of course, our Muslim communities as well to ensure that we're getting it right. We need to talk to everybody. And it's going to be a lot of that work in a very short period of time. We know the roadmap. We've been here before, but I will say this Latino caucus had done some of its best work in these most trying times. And so I know that we will do this again with all of your support and in coordination with each and every one of you that are the experts. So thank you.
Thank you. And Senator, let me ask you, what is the timeline that we're looking at in terms of the special session, the duration of it? Do you all have a sense of that right now?
Yes, we will. Yes, we will be convening December 2nd. So the time when we're normally getting sworn in and everybody's happy, we will also convene the special session at that time. I expect a lot of conversation. The Latino caucus is ready to not just have a press conference, but again, follow that press conference up with action. And then talk about our roadmap for the next year and what that will look like for our Latino communities. And again, in conjunction with our other diversity caucuses, really uplift each other's voices and be in partnership with each other, because this is going to be a very trying time ahead. We're already getting a ton of calls within our district offices about resources. We're building a resource network up with all of our stakeholders to be put on our individual websites and also just to be shared broadly in social media. So we are taking quick action very fast. But what I would suggest for everybody to do is to contact our offices. Let us know what else we should be thinking about. We're not always going to get it right. And we certainly don't want to legislate or think we know it all in Sacramento. We have all of you here. We have some of the best innovators in this space and the best supporters for our Latino community, but we need more support and ideas across the state to ensure that we get it right for this special session. And this not just the special session, but just ongoing legislation. Many of us are also looking at uplifting some of the bills that may have been vetoed in the past that would have supported immigration services. I worked very closely with Chirla on an Office of Immigration Affairs that would have been really great to have right now at this time. Unfortunately, it was vetoed by the governor. So we will be discussing many of these issues going forward and how we can revamp those pieces of legislation.
Thank you, Chair Gonzalez. Angelica, yeah, this is not the first go round on this. We saw this 2017 to 2021 in Trump's first term. But with the language of the campaign, the rhetoric of it, he's promised for it to be much more massive in terms of mass deportation. At the same time, I'm worried because it feels like there's a fatigue at pushing back, at resisting. And also almost psychologically, this sense that, well, he won the popular vote this time. And he said exactly what he's going to do. And also, let's be honest, right now, the coalition generally that has really provided, the resistance and the pushback, that is probably as challenged as it has been, and there's work to do to make sure that it's strong. Given all of that and other dynamics, I mean, you're right on the front lines. Where does the immigrant rights movement go from here? And what is it that you see out there in of course, resources, but where do you go from here, and what needs to happen to make sure that our immigrant communities are protected?
So the first thing I'm just going to say is, I don't know who you've been talking to, but the folks that I work with are ready to fight, and they are ready to stand up for their families. And I just really want you to understand that everybody who's listening are our leaders who are part of our organized committees across the state of California and immigrant rights organizations are absolutely committed to each other and absolutely committed towards defending our families. So and these are the people who are who they know are the priority for this administration. And I'm hearing from them, I'm not going to let this man, this individual, scare me from defending my family and my home here in the United States. So that is where I'm bolstered, and where I get what I would say my direct vision of how to move forward. And so the first thing that I also want to say is we've been here before, but also during the Obama years, and prior to that to the Bush years, and prior to that to the Clinton years. And so what is happening in this country is that this country has actually focused so much on enforcement and so little on the full integration and inclusion of immigrant communities. And what we're seeing today is that very decades-long failure. And so then having an individual be able to then penalize a community, millions of people, over 12 million people undocumented now, based on the new sort of data, who can then be actually pummeled in an election, and yet they don't have a vote and they don't have the ability to then bring some accountability to somebody. And so the one thing I want to say is that I don't care if he had 75 million votes, 100 million votes, 300 million votes. There is no mandate in this country. Nobody should be given a mandate to cause cruelty to other human beings, to do what he says he's going to do, not just to immigrant communities, but to the trans community, LGBTQ+. We heard a lot about it, supporting police brutality in this election. Nobody can have that mandate. And we also have to understand, yeah, he could have gotten all the votes, but what he is stating to do is absolutely abhorrent. And everything we do is to defy that horribleness that is happening. And that means to openly defy. And that means to truly, wherever you sit from a place of influence or power, that your actions are absolutely defying that, but at the same time demonstrating what we are about. And so for us, this is a moment where our leadership in different spaces has to really demonstrate that. The other thing that I would just say is we here in California want to make sure that we don't lose sight, even as we fight at the national level, and we will, and in collaboration and coalition with many other social justice, economic justice, racial justice organizations, immigrant rights organizations, we need to look at California, because California matters not just to Californians, but it matters for the rest of the country, because it's giving a counter narrative of progressive and pro-immigrant. It is ensuring that in places that are what I call hostile territories here in the state of California, like there are some places in northern San Bernardino County that are very hostile to our community, but that we have state legislation that says, well, you can want to enforce upon a person and act this way, but our laws at the state are saying that this is the way we operate. And so I just think that there's an incredible opportunity for us to play the leadership role that we need to have, and also not to and going back to what Dr. Rojas stated, to uplift the organizing in our community, which is so critical. It's about constituency building across our region, and it is also incredibly important that we really demonstrate to everyone that we're around that these are not acceptable modes of operation, because then we really lose the battle. And for us to think about that even in this victorious moment that Trump and MAGA have had, that we need to understand that it's not it. And it is not right, and that we can have this as an opportunity where 2 years from now, 4 years from now, we can actually say we actually use this moment to create power in our communities and to actually defy this vision of America.
Yeah, no, you make a wonderful, wonderful points about the need for moral courage and acting on that in this moment. And so thank you for that. Fred, I mean, you mentioned, and I have enjoyed listening to you this last year that I've been in philanthropy, talk about the need to go on offense, and you mentioned that. And also, though, as you said, right, like the jury is still out in terms of who's going to follow, right? Who's going to take that approach? Can you flesh out a little bit more about, what role does philanthropy have in building, supporting those, where Angelica stands on direct services, and then within itself to take that long, hard look and do the gut check right now in this moment and actually push back, and instead of just going with the trend and, following the advice of the general counsel that might say, hey, you know what I mean? Like,
Absolutely.
we do that. How do we get from A to B?
Absolutely. And I think in answering that, I'll probably just underline a few of the things that everybody else has said and maybe double click on a couple of those things as well. One is I would just +1, +2, +3 to funding power. And to Carmen's point, to fund power in a way that it doesn't just revolve around election cycles, that we really have to do the base building, power building, speak to people in ways that resonate with what their aspirations and needs are, and not to abandon direct services, because a lot of what we see in terms of building power is through a direct service door. And so it is not an either or, as we really have to figure out what the balance is on this stuff. There was a Panther saying that, you can't really lead the people until you feed the people. And I think we need to make sure that we attend to that. And I think that's a part of what we need to do. I think the second thing is, and this was mentioned as well, we have to use our voice in philanthropy. It's not just about throwing money at issues and then retreating. It is about really talking about and standing by what you believe in moments like this. My mom always talks about the fact that what's the use of building a reputation unless you're willing to risk it? And we in philanthropy spend a lot of time building social capital around our reputations. And this is the time to be putting it on the table and to be risking it. And we need to be not foolish or haphazard about how we risk it, but be strategic about that. And that leads me to my second point, which is part of what we have to do is provide air cover to our colleagues on the ground who are engaged in the fight. they are going to be under attack. They are, we've already seen folks talking about weaponizing the Department of the Treasury to try to, intimidate people around their 501c3 status. There'll be other kind of minions that are associated, but not necessarily in the administration, that are going to be sending and already have been sending hate mail, text messages, death threats to people who are a part of the resistance. And we have to make sure that we are using our voice to provide air cover to those people as well. And I want to emphasize something that Angelica said. There is going to be a tendency for us to focus in on the national level and what happened there in California. But we cannot forget that in California, we could not muster up the courage to eliminate indentured servitude and slavery. We couldn't muster up the courage to support rent control. We couldn't muster up the courage and support to support bringing the bond threshold, the voter approval threshold for affordable housing bond measures down to 55%. And we supported Prop 36, which rolled back the criminal justice reforms that we supported several years ago. This is not just a national problem. Our state is moving. And our state is moving, I think, because we have mastered, as Carmen said, the language and the rhetoric of social justice without actually improving people's lives in a lot of instances. And so we've got to get back to basics about making sure that we are engaged in the kind of work that is not just about lofty rhetoric, but actually being in the living rooms and on the streets and really improving people's lives in a tangible way.
Thank you for that, Fred. And, that's a perfect segue, Carmen, into my question for you, which is one of the really impressive things that I know you've been spearheading is this idea of public dollars for public good. The aim here is to connect the two and to ensure that philanthropy supports efforts ultimately on the ground to change the policies and the resources that benefit vulnerable communities and protect them. How are you thinking about this moment with regard to something like that?
Yeah. I just can't thank you enough for inviting me to be a part of this panel. I feel like I have been able to make connections in an experience that I have been having kind of by myself. Folks, I live in North Carolina, and to do that with you all has been a real gift for me today. So I just want to thank you again. Government is everywhere. It's the school board races. It's, for me, public dollars for the public good helps to name out loud, one, that philanthropy and rich people are not enough to solve our problems. Two, that we should not surrender our public goods in lieu of really bad and crappy private options, that there are a set of fundamental things that people need to live a good life in this country that we should be able to depend on our government to provide us. Housing, quality education, clean water, clean air. There are a whole host of things. And over the last 50 years, we have slowly whittled away and imagined that somehow a billionaire is better at providing affordable housing than HUD, or that a billionaire is better at providing quality public education than the Department of Education. On the one side, it lets our government off the hook from using our dollars to make our lives better. And on the other side, it's this false premise that privatized goods actually make our lives better. And we know that that's wrong. We are living in a moment of such wild inequality, right? One billionaire, the richest person in the world is spending time influencing the incoming president. And we can't turn away from that. We have to be able to understand that these institutions, regardless who's there tomorrow, the next day, the day after that, are our institutions. And philanthropy, I just believe, is insufficient. It's insufficient. We don't have enough money. We don't have enough power. We're actually not accountable to anybody. When you're an elected official, you actually are accountable. And so for me, public dollars for the public goods creates like an on-ramp for people to see government as a terrain to contest for power. And so we will continue to fund groups across the country who are, one, planting a seed in people's imagination that our government should be working for them. You know, many people don't believe when the garbage man doesn't come and pick up their garbage, they're like, oh, well, you know, that's government not working for us. We want to plant a seed and water that seed, tend to that seed, so that people start to imagine that government can work for them. Secondly, is that we want to support people to come together and hold government accountable when it's not working for them. So it's not enough for us to plant this seed. We have to build, to Fred's point, enough people power so that we can hold crappy, corrupt elected officials accountable for not using our resources to make our lives better. There has to be an on-ramp for that. And so for us, we're going to keep funding this work. I would be remiss if I didn't say this. Angelica, I so appreciate you mentioning sort of not no mandate, this idea that there's not a mandate regardless of how many people vote. And I think that that's such an important thing in a moment where many people are parsing out like how many numbers and who, how, when, why. It doesn't actually matter. I think one of the things that I have been holding really close is that the fascism perfects itself on the backs of the most vulnerable and exploited people. And right now it's immigrants. Right now it's undocumented immigrants. But, you know, trust, it's going to be everybody. And if we pretend that somehow we are safe, we are doing all of us a huge disservice. So thank you, Angelica, for saying that.
And thank you, Carmen. Thank you, Angelica, and to Chair Gonzalez and Fred for all of your leadership in what you do, for your voice and your work during this very crucial time, and for the conversation today, which has been a very rich one, and I think has given our audience a sense of what's happening and what's possible. At the Latino Community Foundation, as you mentioned with Chirla, Angelica, we're ready to stand up and fight. Already, we have moved forward with approving 6 different planning grants to organizations that are directly serving our immigrant communities throughout the state of California. On top of that, because we're a community foundation, we have the ability to advocate. And so we look forward to advocating in the coming weeks and months here in California and otherwise for our vulnerable immigrant communities and for the well-being of the Latino community in general. We know that it's not only about immigration policy, but also, as Carmen and others have mentioned, it's about housing, it's about education, it's about job opportunities, and it's about the ability of people to feel safe and secure in the communities that they live in. And so we're committed to using our voice to doing that. We're also re-urging our Latino Power Fund. In the summer of 2021, as California was opening back up after COVID, the Latino Community Foundation launched the Latino Power Fund as a way to draw resources to support the hundreds of Latina and Latino-led organizations that LCF has supported. This against the backdrop of the fact that big philanthropy underfunds Latina and Latino-led organizations tremendously. Less than 2% of big philanthropy's dollars go to organizations that are Latino or Latina-led. The Latino Community Foundation is there to bridge that gap. And the Latino Power Fund is a compelling way for us to do that. We've set a goal in these next couple of years until June of 2026, which would have been the 5-year time frame that we originally set out for the Latino Power Fund, a new fundraising goal of $10 million. And we ask our funders, our partners, our allies to consider an investment in the Latino Power Fund, especially at this very critical moment for the community. I draw my optimism from understanding that people are fundamentally still hopeful, and there's so many people out there that are doing tremendous work to change things for the better. They're doing that in the public sector, they're doing that in the nonprofit sector, the philanthropic sector, and also in the private sector. And together, we have to find ways to raise our voice and push back and reject this dark vision of the future that is upon us. We've done it before. and we need to do it again, especially to protect our most vulnerable communities and to ensure that this nation can live up to the best ideals that we want it to live up to. All of us on this Zoom and each and every one of you who are watching have a role to play in doing that. I want to say thank you to our panelists for participating today, for showing the fierce resolve that you have, for doing it with a corazón and an integrity and a persistence that is key to success. And for everyone out there in your different ways in your own lives for supporting that effort and for making a better future for everybody possible. We're going to need that work right now in this moment. Thank you for joining us.